Hello, third graders. It's time for Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Yay! We are in chapter 7. If you'll recall, Eustace had snuck away trying to get out of some work and got himself lost and watched a dragon die and then crawled into the dragon's cave and took a nap and woke up to find that he was the dragon. And he went down to the beach. He was able to find the others, and of course the others didn't know who he was, but they figured out that he could understand, and he had put a bracelet up around his upper arm, and when he became a dragon, he couldn't get it off, and it was hurting his arm, and Lucy kind of took compassion on him. So this is how the adventure ended. "Look at what?" said Edmund. "Look at the device on the gold," said Caspian. "A little hammer and a diamond above it like a star," said Drinian. "I've seen that before." "Seen it," said Caspian. "Why, of course you have. That's the sign of a great Narnian house. This is Lord Octavian and his armoring." "Villain," said Reepicheep to the dragon, "have you devoured a Narnian lord?" But the dragon shook his head violently. "Or perhaps," said Lucy, "this is Lord Octavian, turned into a dragon, under an enchantment, you know." "It needn't be either," said Edmund. "All dragons collect gold, but I think it's safe to guess that Octavian got no further than this island." "Are you the Lord Octavian?" said Lucy to the dragon, and then, when it sadly shook its head, "Are you someone enchanted? Someone human, I mean?" It nodded its head violently. When someone said, people disputed afterwards whether Lucy or Edmund said it first, "You're not Eustace by any chance?" Eustace nodded his terrible dragon head and thumped its tail in the sea, and everyone skipped back. Some of the sailors, with ejaculations "I will not" put down in writing, means they yelled, to avoid the enormous and boiling tears which flowed from his eyes. Lucy tried hard to console him, and even screwed up her courage to kiss his scaly face, and nearly everyone said, "Oh, hard luck." And everyone assured Eustace that they would all stand by him, and many said that they were sure that there was some way of disenchanting him, if they'd have him as right as rain in a day or two. And of course, they were very anxious to hear his story, but he couldn't speak. More than once in the days that followed, he attempted to write down for them in the sand, but this never succeeded. In the first place, Eustace, never having read the right books, had no idea how to tell a story straight. And for another thing, the muscles and nerves in the dragon's claws that had never had to use the hand to learn to write weren't really built for writing anyway. As a result, he never got nearly to the end of before the tide came in and washed away all the writing except the bits that were already trodden on or accidentally swished out by his tail. And all that anyone had seen was something like this. The dots were bits that were smudged out. "I went to sleep, Dragon's cave, 'cause it was dead, and ain't so hard, woke up and could get off my arm. Oh, bother." There's the text on that. Oops. They're just kind of all over the place. It was, however, clear to everyone that Eustace's character was rather improved by becoming a dragon. He was anxious to help. He flew over the whole island and found that it was all mountains, inhabited only by wild goats and droves of wild swine. Of these, he brought back many carcasses for the revictualling of the ship. He was a very humane killer, too, for he could dispatch a beast with one blow of his tail so that it didn't know, or presumably still doesn't know, that it had been killed. He ate a few himself, of course, but always alone, for now that he was a dragon, he liked his food raw, but he could never bear to let the others see him at his messy meals. One day, flying slowly and wearily in the sky in great triumph, he bore back to camp a great tall pine tree, which he had torn up by the roots in a distant valley, which could be made into the capital mast. You remember the mast had been broken in a big storm. And in the evening, if it turned chilly, as it sometimes did after heavy rains, he was a comfort to everyone, for the whole party would come and sit with their backs against his hot sides and get well warmed and dried. and one puff of his fiery breath would light the most obstinate fire. Sometimes he would select a party for a flight on his back, so they could see wheeling below them the great green slopes and the rocky heights and the narrow pit-like valleys, and far out over the sea to the eastward spot of a darker blue of the blue horizon, which might be land. This pleasure, quite new to him, of being liked, and still more of liking other people, was what kept Eustace from despair, for it was very dreary being a dragon. He shuddered whenever he caught sight of his own reflection. When he flew over a mountain lake. He hated the huge bat-like wings and the saw-edged ridge on his back and his cruel curved claws. He was almost afraid to be alone with himself, and yet he was ashamed to be with others. On the evening when he was not being used as a hot water bottle, he would slink away from camp and lie curled up like a snake between the wood and the water. On such occasions, greatly to his surprise, Reepicheep was his most constant comforter. The noble mouse would creep away from the merry circle at the campfire and sit down by the dragon's head, well to the windward to be out of the way of his smoky breath. There he would explain what had, that what had happened to Eustace was a striking illustration of turn of fortune's wheel, and that if he had Eustace in his own house in Narnia, it was really a hole, not a house, and the dragon's head, let alone his body, would not have fitted in. He would show him more than 100 examples of emperors, kings, dukes, knights, poets, lovers, astronomers, philosophers, and magicians who had fallen from prosperity into the most distressing circumstances, and of whom many had recovered and lived happily ever afterwards. It did not, perhaps, seem so very comforting at the time, but it was kindly meant, and Eustace never forgot it. But of course, what hung over everyone like a cloud was the problem of what to do with their dragon when they were ready to sail. They tried not to talk of it when he was there, but he couldn't help overhearing things like, would he fit along one side of the deck? And we'd have to shift all the stores to the other side down below so as to balance, or would towing him be any good? Or would he be able to keep up by flying? And often of all, how are we to feed him? And poor Eustace realized more and more that since the first day he came on board, he had been nothing but an unmitigated nuisance, and that he was now a greater nuisance still. And this ate into his mind, just as the bracelet ate into his foreleg. He knew that it only made it worse to tear at it with his great teeth, but he couldn't help tearing now and then, especially on hot nights. About 6 days after they had landed on Dragon Island, Edmund happened to wake up very early one morning. It was just getting gray, so you could see the tree trunks if they were between you, and the bay was not in the other direction. As he woke, he thought he heard something moving, so he raised himself on one elbow and looked about him. Presently, he thought he saw a dark figure moving in the seaward side of the wood. The idea that at once occurred to his mind was, are we so sure there are no natives on this island after all? And then he thought it was Caspian. It was about the right size, but he knew that Caspian had been sleeping next to him, and could see that he hadn't moved. Edmund made sure that his sword was in its place, and then rose to investigate. I'm going to take a sip of tea here while you think about who it could possibly be. Good cup of tea. He came down softly to the edge of the wood, and the dark figure was still there. He now saw that it was too small for Caspian and too big for Lucy. It had not run away. Edmund drew his sword and was about to challenge the stranger when the stranger said in a low voice, "Is that you, Edmund?" "Yes, who are you?" said he. "Don't you know me?" said the other. "It's me, Eustace." "By Jove," said Edmund, "so it is. My dear chap." "Hush," said Eustace, and he lurched as if he were going to fall. "Hello," said Edmund, steadying him. "What are you? Are you ill?" Eustace was silent for so long that Edmund thought he was fainting, but at last he said, "It's been ghastly, you know, but it's all right now. Could we go talk somewhere? I don't want to meet the others just yet." "Yes, rather, anywhere you like," said Edmund. "We can go and sit on the rocks over there. I say, I am glad to see you, looking yourself again. You must have had a pretty beastly time." They went to the rocks and sat down, looking out across the bay, while the sky got paler and paler, and the stars disappeared, except for one very bright one, low down near the horizon. I won't tell you how I became a dragon till I can tell the others and get it all over, said Eustace. By the way, I didn't even know I was a dragon until I heard you use the word when I turned up there the other morning. I wanted to tell you how I stopped being one. Fire ahead, said Edmund. Well, last night I was more miserable than ever. That beastly armoring was hurting like anything. Is that all right now? Eustace laughed, a different laugh from any that Edmund had heard him give before, and slipped the bracelet easily off his arm. There it is, he said, and anyone who likes it can have it as far as I'm concerned. Well, as I say, I was lying awake and wondering what on earth would become of me. And then, mind you, it may have been all a dream. I don't know. Go on, said Edmund with considerable patience. Well, anyway, I looked up and I saw the very last thing I expected. A huge lion coming slowly toward me. And one strange thing was that there was no moon last night, but there was moonlight where the lion was. So it came nearer and nearer, and I was terribly afraid of it. You may think that being a dragon, I could have knocked any lion out easily enough, but it wasn't that kind of fear. It wasn't afraid of it eating me. I was just afraid of it, if you can understand. Well, it came closer to me and looked me straight in my eyes, and I shut my eyes tight. But that wasn't any good because it told me to follow it. You mean it spoke? Well, I don't know. Now that you mention it, I don't think it did. It just told me all the same. And I knew I'd have to do what it told me, so I got up and I followed it, and it led me a long way into the mountains. There was always this moonlight over and around the lion wherever he went. So at last we came to the top of a mountain. I'd never seen it before, and on the top of the mountain there was a garden, trees and fruit and everything. In the middle of it, there was a well. I knew it was a well because you could see the water bubbling up from the bottom of it. But it was a lot bigger than most wells, like a very big round bath with marble steps going down into it. The water was as clear as anything, and I thought if I could get in there and bathe, it would ease the pain in my leg. But the lion told me I must undress first. Mind you, I don't know if he said any words out loud or not. I was just going to say that I couldn't undress because I hadn't any clothes on when suddenly I thought, dragons are snaky sort of things, and snakes can cast their skins. Of course, I thought that's what the lion means. So I started scratching myself, and my scales began coming off all over the place. Then I scratched a little deeper, and instead of just the scales coming here and there, my whole skin started peeling off beautifully, like it does after an illness, or as if I were a banana. In a minute or two, I stepped out of it. I could see it lying there beside me, looking rather nasty. It was a most lovely feeling, so I started to go down into the well for my bath. But just as I was going to put my foot into the water, I looked down and saw that it was all hard and rough and wrinkled and scaly, just as it had before. That's all right, I said. It only means I had another smaller suit on underneath the first one. I have to get out of that too. So I scratched and tore again, and after the skin peeled off beautifully, out I stepped and left it beside the other one and went down to the well for my bath. Well, exactly the same thing happened again. And I thought to myself, oh dear, how many skins have I got to take off? For I was longing to bathe my leg. So I scratched away for the third time and got off the third skin just like the other two and stepped out of it. But as soon as I looked at myself in the water, I knew that it had done no good. Then the lion said, but I don't know if it spoke, you will have to let me undress you. I was afraid of its claws, I can tell you, but I was pretty nearly desperate now, so I lay flat down on my back and let him do it. The first tear he made was so deep I thought he'd gone right down into my heart. And when he began pulling the skin off, it hurt worse than anything I'd ever felt. The only thing that made me able to bear it was the pleasure of feeling that stuff peel off. You know, if you've ever picked a scab in a sore place, it hurts like the billy, but oh, it is fun to see it coming away. Don't pick your scabs, by the way. I know exactly what you mean, said Edmund. Well, he peeled the beastly stuff right off, just as I thought I had done myself the 3 other times, only they hadn't hurt. And there it was, lying on the grass, only ever so much thicker and darker and more knobbly looking than the others had been. And there I was, as smooth and soft as a peeled switch and smaller than I had ever been. Then he caught hold of me. I didn't like that much, for I was very tender underneath now that I had no skin on, and he threw me into the water. It smarted like anything, but only for a moment. After that, it became perfectly delicious, and as soon as I started swimming and splashing, I found all the pain from my arm is gone. And then I saw why. I had turned into a boy again. You'd think me simply phony if I told you how I felt about my own arm. I know that I have no muscle and it's pretty moldy compared with Caspian's, but I was rather glad to see them. After a bit, the lion took me out and dressed me. Dressed you with his paws? I don't remember exactly that bit, but he did somehow or other, in new clothes, the same ones I've got on now, as a matter of fact. And then suddenly I was back here, which is what makes me think it must have been a dream. No, it wasn't a dream, said Edmund. Why not? Well, there are the clothes for one thing, and you've been, well, undragoned for another. Well, what do you think it was then? Asked Eustace. I think you've seen Aslan, said Edmund. Aslan, said Eustace. I've heard the name mentioned several times since we joined the Dawn Treader, and I felt, I don't know what, I hated it. But I was hating everything then, and by the way, I'd like to apologize. I'm afraid I've been pretty beastly. That's all right, said Edmund. Between ourselves, you haven't been as bad as I was on my first trip to Narnia. You were only being a twit. I was a traitor. Well, don't tell me about it then, said Eustace. But who's Aslan? Do you know him? Well, he knows me, said Edmund. He's the great lion, the son of the emperor over the sea, who saved me and saved Narnia. We've all seen him. Lucy sees him most often, and it may be Aslan's country that we're sailing to. Neither said anything for a while. The last bright star had vanished, and though they could not see the sunrise because of the mountains on their right, they knew that it was going on because the sky above the bay turned the color of roses. Then some bird of the parrot kind screamed in the woods behind them, and they heard movements among the trees, and finally a blast of Caspian's horn. The camp was astir. Great was the rejoicing when Edmund and the restored Eustace walked to the breakfast circle around the campfire. And now, of course, everyone heard the earlier part of the story. People wondered whether the dragon had killed the Lord Octavian several years ago, or whether Octavian himself had been the old dragon. The jewels with which Eustace had crammed into his pockets in the cave had disappeared along with the clothes that he had been wearing. But no one, least of all Eustace himself, felt any desire to go back to that valley for more treasure. In a few days now, the Dawn Treader, remasted, repainted, and well stored, was ready to sail. Before they embarked, Caspian caused to be cut onto a smooth cliff facing in the bay the words, Dragon Island, discovered by Caspian X, King of Narnia, etc., in the 4th year of his reign. Here, as we suppose, the Lord Octavian had his death. It would be nice and fairly true to say that from that time forth Eustace was a different boy. To be strictly accurate, he began to be a different boy. He had relapses. There were still many days when he could be very tiresome, but most of those I shall not notice. The cure had begun. The Lord Octavian's arm ring had a curious fate. Eustace did not want it and offered it to Caspian. Caspian offered it to Lucy. She did not care about having it. Very well then, catch as catch can, said Caspian, and flung it into the air. This was when they were all standing and looking up at the inscription. Up went the ring, flashing in the sunlight, and caught and hung as neatly as a well-thrown quoit, a little projection on the rock. So it got caught on the rock and hung there. No one could climb up to get it from below, and no one could climb down to get it from above. And there, for all I know, it is hanging still, and may hang till that world ends. That's the end of the chapter. So when you think about, we talked about when we read when we read Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, we talked about how Aslan was kind of like Jesus. And one of the neat things I like about this chapter is it talks about how, Eustace tried to get rid of his old self and he couldn't. He couldn't do it by himself. Okay? Aslan needed to do it. Just like when we try to get rid of our old sin and our old selves, we can't do it by ourselves. And sometimes it's not pleasant, but Jesus guides us through and he helps us and he gives us new clothes at the end, clothes that are more glorious and comfortable and wonderful than we have for ourselves. So I hope you are enjoying the story. I'll see you later. I love you, third graders.